So my name is Irene Abalo Otto. I am a year 2 student. I'm a DJ at the Ugandan University Graduate School of Media and Communication. Please introduce yourself to us.
So my name is Moses Kemibaro. I'm the founder and CEO of a digital agency called .Savvy. I also happen to be a podcaster, blogger, technology analyst, and also a digital trainer. It's a pleasure to be on this conversation.
Thank you. So we are looking at a time when the media that thrived for decades, others for almost, from the time immemorial, beginning to struggle, and others are even closing down because it no longer makes sense to do the business of news. What, in your observation, are we not doing right to go with the audience that needs content on the go, on the move, in snippets and not all the details? But we are doing things, I think, in a way that either pushes them away or does not satisfy them. What's your observation?
First of all, I think it's very important to have high quality media or journalism, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to go to trusted sources for information and insights that matter. But most importantly, that in an age where things like fake news and the likes have become a big concern, high quality media and journalism is still required. However, what we can see is that as consumers have moved towards more of a digital first behavior, meaning that they may not be watching as much TV in the traditional sense or listening to much radio or even reading newspapers. Again, looking at what happened during COVID-19, where a lot of consumer behavior shifted as much as well because of the change in media consumption behavior, we need to see our traditional or legacy media organizations essentially following the consumer or following the audience to where they're spending most of their time. If you look at a lot of statistics coming out from a lot of consumption or rather media analysis sources, you will see that in particular when you sort of reach what they call the millennials or the Gen Z, the younger age segments within the populations across Africa, increasingly we see that a lot of media is being consumed via smartphones or essentially mobile phones. And as a result, most of the platforms where this content is being consumed tend to be social media, so the likes of YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and so forth. And then at the same time, we're seeing this a transition towards short form content, where whether it's in video, audio format, a lot of that audience, courtesy of what we like to call TikTokification, where TikTok has sort of changed behavior to be more driven around shorter, more snackable types of content. They do not have the patience to consume long-form content in the manner that traditional media has normally done it. Therefore, when I look at the modern media company, I think that they need to see how, on one hand, they can try and strengthen and possibly borrow ideas and practices from the digital first behaviors and possibly bringing it into some of their legacy platforms like radio and TV. But equally so, they need to sort of bolster their capabilities and the types of content they're creating to speak to these younger segments and also those who are even older who are increasingly consuming content in the same manner, so that they're using the platforms to publish and share. Where we have radio, we can repurpose that content for things like audio podcasts on Spotify and so forth. But more importantly, we need to be where the consumer is and create content in the type of formats and the type of messaging and delivery that they have now become accustomed to.
Thank you very much. I see especially prominent media houses. I will give an example of Nation Media Group, or you can say even the Herald, or you can say Alpha Media Group. They're all doing this. And in a way, you find their presence online. You find their presence on these social media platforms. But how do you make your audience shift from your social media platforms to follow you on your website where you're actually monetizing the content? Because the media houses are struggling because the content that they're sharing on social media, the things that they're sending on social media, they're spending money to create, but do not see the money coming back to them. And that is where the problem is. They're saying, you're telling me to invest in my stuff, invest in retooling the people who are supposed to work on the social media content, but I don't see the money coming back to me. So what would you advise there?
So for me, I think it's again thinking through the business model, right? Like I think I mentioned in the session we had earlier today that I now see more traffic on my long form content on platforms like Medium and Substack and also LinkedIn, more so than my own proprietary blog at moseskemibaro.com. Now, already for me, that's a bit of frustration, almost like a media house, because I'm like, I built this asset over 15, 16, 17 years. That's where the bulk of my traffic came from to begin with. Now it's a smallest source of traffic because the social media platforms is where most of the consumption is happening. And I would say to any media house today that when you see that is the trend, then you can't fight it. You can't change that. If the consumer is preferring to consume on these platforms of choice, then we need to think, how do we still monetize even if we can't run a banner ad on that content within, say, a Facebook environment or let's say LinkedIn or even TikTok? So possibly what we need to think about is how do we then combine the elements of the actual story within the content and find ways of then maybe perhaps embedding elements of advertising within the stream of content itself. So we need to rethink how we monetize, how we package, possibly even the way that we work with people like advertisers who are helping us commercialize our platforms and say to them, listen, we're on these social media platforms. These are the ways and means that we're exploring that we can embed your commercialization component within the content that's sitting within these areas. Because in fact, you'll find that even the likes of Nation Media have built very substantial followings on many social media platforms, meaning that there is very clearly an opportunity to monetize, but the way that it's going to manifest itself in those environments is going to be quite different from sending them, say, to the Nation website. So we need to kind of, I suppose, rethink and redo these approaches so that they're compatible with this new context that we're operating in.
So the advice has been that the media can actually now begin to do or offer services outside of journalism to cushion the financial stress that they're getting, the distress that they're getting within the journalism. I don't know what your advice would be. Should media houses now begin, say, giving event services, because that has been a lot of advice given to the media. I don't know how that will play out, but it's all out there and everybody's thinking about it.
I think what we cannot disregard is that media and more of the established and trusted media sources will always be a form of information that people trust and rely on. What we need to do is figure out how do we use that reach and engagement with our existing audiences, and then maybe use the fact that we are very visible, trusted sources of insight and information and translate that into other forms of commercialization. As we presented earlier today in this training, one of the things that I would consider is this convergence between what we call content and commerce. All right. So many media houses, for instance, in other markets today are doing tie-ups with providers of products and services so that they then have affiliate links within the content embedded. So when you read an article, you'll have a call to action saying, if you'd like to purchase this product or you'd like to subscribe for this service through our partner, click on this link. So then it becomes a sort of an incremental source of revenue for the content service provider. In sort of extreme examples, we're seeing even content companies or rather media houses are going as far as building their own e-commerce platforms, meaning that they're literally creating within their business the ability to commercialize their content by providing a pathway to purchase to products and services that they either offer themselves directly, including things like merchandise, or maybe use third parties to actually sell these additional products and services. But ultimately, I think what we're saying is that the entire media business as we know it is evolving and changing radically. And I think one of the guiding lights in terms of the possibilities in that area has to be the New York Times. What they've managed to achieve in North America and globally through their platforms is incredible because they've managed to build a very robust digital-first business model within the media context where many of their contemporaries are struggling. And you'll find that within that space, they've actually gone and, for instance, went and bought platforms like, I think it's called Wordle, which allows people to play games, puzzles, and so forth. They're literally buying and incorporating digital assets into the core media business that allows them to have new points of monetization. So it may not just be monetization on the basis of news content and then advertising, but literally either building or acquiring digital assets that complement what they're doing as media. So you'll find, for instance, within the New York Times, they have assets which, for instance, shoot video content around cuisine. They have assets around real estate where they are selling rentals and selling houses, but they then act as an agent on behalf of those who sell these products and services. So I think the media business has to start thinking about how do we converge the fact that our content creates attention and connection with our audiences, and then what are the layers of additional products and services that we can embed into our proposition that are complementary and relevant to what our audience wants to see and hear.
Thank you so much, Moses. But I would like to speak to the fact that as an audience in Africa, we are not into paying for news. We are not
Absolutely.
into paying for content. But the direction that legacy media tends to take, and I've seen it happen a lot, is that we are putting content behind paywalls and asking our audiences to pay. But if you look at the analytics are telling us that, you know what you've put behind your paywall doesn't have traffic. What you've not actually put behind the paywall is what is having traffic. So how do you balance this and remain relevant in your with your premium content? And also, I don't know how can the media crack this, because the balance seems to be lost in creating content that people are actually not accessing or paying for, but that's where you're putting the bulk of your money, your energy, and everything. And here you are with the free content that everybody's happy to consume, but they're not willing to go the other side.
So this is a conundrum that I think not even just locally in Africa or regionally in East Africa, but globally, media companies are struggling. The whole monetization challenge even stems from the fact that a lot of platforms like Google and Facebook are driving traffic to them, but without any commercialization opportunities. Now, within the African context, one of our biggest issues is indeed that people are not willing to pay for content, at least news content in the conventional sense, the way they bought newspapers and stuff. And we're seeing declining consumption in those areas. Again, I think it comes back to the question of rethinking the business model, right? At the front of it, we need to have high-quality journalism and media that is trusted and appreciated by the masses. I think whether they're willing to pay or not, they are confirming that they want and need and appreciate the content. What we need to now think about is how do we actually monetize that content? And if they're not willing to pay, is advertising the only solution? Are there other ways and means that we can find to commercialize that content? And I think a big part of this is going to be, leveraging things like what we call first-party data, where the more we learn and know about our audiences through the various technologies and algorithms, perhaps there's different ways we can figure out how to monetize. Maybe we don't need our entire audience to pay for the paywall. Maybe we can segment our audiences and know that these are the people who are willing and able to pay, and these are the ones who are not. For those who are not willing to pay, then how do we still provide content to them and maybe subsidize that with advertising? Kind of explaining that freemium model we see, say, on platforms like Spotify. They create content or they publish content, and there are those who consume Spotify for free, but they see and hear ads, and there are those who are willing to pay a subscription fee and don't. So I think we need to kind of look at sort of a model that is sort of variable in terms of how we approach it, and think about different cohorts of audiences, knowing those who have a higher demographic segment who are willing to pay, knowing those who are not able to pay but still want to consume content. What is that trade-off in terms of I want the content, therefore maybe I see some advertising, something that essentially is sort of a give and take. But the truth of the matter is everyone is struggling with this in media, not just in Kenya and East Africa, but globally. And I don't have a singular answer, but what I do know is that the models of the past will not work in the context of the future.
Thank you very much. And to remind our audience that for this show, we are seated here at the Aga Khan University in Nairobi. And I'm also thinking if audio is the next future, because everybody's driving in their car and they're listening to the audio. I can sit anywhere and now interview you from whichever part of the world, as long as I have access to the internet infrastructure. Does it mean that radio is doing better and radio perhaps will not be affected by this?
What we know is, especially when you go into sort of rural and possibly vernacular scenarios, radio is still massively popular. And remember, in many of these places, internet access may not be, first of all, readily accessible, and even the consumers of internet may not be able to afford it in the way that you have in more urban parts of the continent. So I think radio still has its place. It's reaching a lot of people, and especially where you have vernacular radio stations, we know for a fact that those stations are performing exceedingly well in these spaces. But that being said, as the internet continues to proliferate, also we see that younger people have a higher propensity for consumption of the internet and an affinity for it, therefore meaning they will find a way of consuming it even within a constrained environment or in a situation where it's an underserved community. They might not be economically able to get some of these things easily, just given the fact that they belong to a lower part of the pyramid. Therefore, from that point of view, what I would say is that some of these medias, the legacy medias, will remain relevant and important. They need to possibly borrow some of the best practices from what's happening on digital and bring them into these traditional areas, but also recognizing that the younger segments will prefer and continue to adopt digital-first technologies. We need to think about how we can use things like podcasts to sort of reach a broader audience globally. More importantly, again, when it comes to the aspect of rethinking how consumers are consuming media, I always like to say that the market decides what happens. So if the market is telling us that this is the way to go, I know for a fact that I listen to podcasts all the time that I'm in the car. I don't listen to the radio, but then I don't necessarily represent the majority of the population. But my consumer behavior has already shifted in that manner. It is my preference. Therefore, if I'm trying to commercialize that content, I need to figure out how to maybe embed advertising in that content. I need to figure out maybe doing strategic partnerships that allow us to maybe sponsor the content or other means and ways of monetizing so that I can reach as many people as possible without the burden of asking them to pay for content that they can't actually afford.
Thank you so much, Moses, for your time. And that has been Random with me, Irene Abalo Otto. Till next time, bye.